So, what's our first story for this series? Well, the first one that comes to my mind is The Raven, and that comes from the very first Simpsons Treehouse of Horror episode back in Season 2. As it turns out, there was no Halloween episode in Season 1 because they were still, trying to work out the quirks in the series. Season 2 is when the tradition first begins, and The Raven was the third skit that night. Now, no list would be complete without it, but why? Why is that so? Well, that's because the Simpsons crew decided to do an adaptation of the classic story by Edgar Allan Poe, The Raven. And, when you really think about it, that's odd, because we don't really see modern TV shows adapting classic stories to their episodes. We don't really see that a lot. And so, they had this challenge, the crew. Not only how do you adapt a classic story and be faithful to it, but also how do you make it relatable to today's audiences? And the episode itself makes reference to that. It's being told by Bart and Lisa, and they discuss how maybe The Raven may not be scary today, but it was certainly scary for its audience back in the 1800s. Much like how Friday the 13th is tamed by today's standards, but, for its time it was pretty scary. So they had that challenge. And not to mention how you make it work within the Simpsons context. And did they achieve it? Oh, yeah, they hit it right out of the park. They succeeded. And, credit goes to its director, David Silverman. And if you know his works, you would know that he's been influenced by Chuck Jones, amongst other animators. And his drawings and poses are very strong, they're very effective, not to mention expressive as well. And we see that from time to time throughout this episode, like when Homer is in fear, dreading what's gonna happen to him next, or what other things the Raven's gonna do to him, or his overreactions towards the end when he's throwing books all over the place before he collapses, from his anger and misery. That is fantastic character animation, no question about it. And another thing that stood out to me in this episode was the art direction, how colorful it is. That's because the storyline is filled with such surreal and phantasmagorical imagery. I mean, it just sticks out in your head. Like the parts when the chair hit a Homer's chair, when it's moving around throughout the room. Or when Lisa and Maggie playing the role of two angels are flying around as well above Homer with candles. Or the time when the camera pans across the room and the furniture moves in depth, much like the multi-plane camera system which we've seen, in past animated films. And towards the end, after Homer's collapse, there's this really cool background, which it's a really long background that changes in perspective as we move from Homer's point of view to where Bart, as the Raven, is positioned in the room. And then, just to go back, there's this really cool background in the middle of the episode when Homer hears a lot of strange sounds. He opens the door, and it's a solitary hallway. But it's not just any solitary hallway. It's a really creepy hallway, and it's painted in hues of green with a lot of shadows, and it's very symmetrical. It gives this presence of eeriness and horror, and it's so well done. I emphasize the art direction is superb. And I want to add that the narrator of this story was none other than James Earl Jones himself. And, the voice of CNN, Darth Vader, Mufasa, I can go on. He is one of the best. And what's funny is, he was seen throughout this episode. He was in the 2 previous skits, this being the 3rd one, being his best. And that too is rare. Usually the guest stars, they only show up for, a few seconds in between. But he's, heard throughout the episode, and that was pretty great. Another awesome thing to know is the music. This was the first episode scored by the show's regular composer, Alf Clausen. He took over for Danny Elfman. As we all know, he, being Tim Burton's collaborator, he did the show's theme song and actually composed the music throughout the first season and a few episodes in season 2. This being the 3rd episode of season 2, Alf takes over and he does a fantastic job. He fills in the shoes, and no wonder why he's still the show's composer. The score is atmospheric, moody, and cinematic, just like the art direction for the episode itself. And, I think again of Fantasia. It's the perfect balance between the source material, of Edgar Allan Poe, the score, and the animation and visuals of the entire storyline is so well done. And if I had to think of, and besides all the stuff I just mentioned, if I had to think of the one key thing that ultimately sold this episode, it was how they repurposed it within the Simpsons context, as I alluded to earlier. They repurposed Homer Simpson in the role of the main character who's mourning for his wife, which they do a funny bit too, where they have a portrait of Marge, and it's a really tall painting. And, because of her beehive hair, it couldn't fit, so they had to put in a smaller portrait to finish it. Another funny touch that shows how they balance the dramatic and comedy together. But I digress. Back to what I was saying before. Homer is repurposed as the main character, while Bart is repurposed as the Raven. This makes perfect sense in my opinion, because at that point there was this intense competition between Homer and Bart. Homer strangling Bart and Bart causing mischief in Homer's life, that type of thing. And, from the Tracy Ullman shorts. So what better way than to exploit that than do that in The Raven, which has that type of competition between the Raven and the main character. And another Chuck Jones reference, this is not that any different from where it's Opera Doc, where it was between Bugs Bunny and Elmer Fudd in this epic fight. And The Raven calls back to that. And I think that's what makes it so cool watching this episode play out that way. And there were fears at the time that this segment would be seen as too pretentious or too artsy-fartsy, that type of thing. But it turns out those fears were proven not true. It actually was the most popular segment of the episode. And those 2 other skits were really good, but this one was just kick-ass. And it set the bar. It set the bar for what the Simpsons Halloween episodes could achieve. This was the one that said this was the high point. And if you had a Halloween skit that was just as great as this segment, then you made it big. That's why, for me personally, it's one of the best Halloween skits from The Simpsons ever. And that's it for that story. Tune in next time for the next segment. Until then, see you later.
Eat my shorts.